Hi everyone, I'm Celine from Blue Calla Patterns and welcome to video 4 for the Balm Wax Canvas Backpack. In this video we're going to be doing the lining assembly. So you're going to need the following pieces. You're going to need your bottom lining piece, and that should have the fusible fleece on the wrong side over top of the fusible woven interfacing. You'll need your 2 slip pocket pieces. You'll need your 2 lining pieces, and one of them should have the rectangle box cut out in the fusible fleece where we'll install our zipper pocket. And then you'll need your top band lining pieces, and those should have fusible fleece on the wrong side. And then you're going to need your zipper facing piece, your 2 zipper pocket lining pieces, and your interior zipper, which is either a 9-inch pre-made zipper or 11 inches of zipper tape. And I'm going to be using zipper tape for my bag. So before we start anything, let's start by marking our centers. So on the lining bottom piece, we're going to use the pattern piece to mark our centers. And then your top band pieces. Along the top and the bottom edge. We'll only need the center mark along the top edge, but just in case I sew the wrong side to the lining piece, I'm going to put it on both. It never hurts to add center marks wherever you may think you need them. And then the same thing for the lining pieces. These ones I really just need them along the bottom, but because I'm not using a directional print, I'm just going to mark it along the top and the bottom. Okay, so now we're going to need your 2 slip pocket pieces, and we're also going to need the lining piece that does not have the rectangle cut out in the fleece. So you're going to start by placing your slip pocket pieces right sides together, and then you're going to pin or clip them along the top edge. And then we're going to sew them together along this top edge, making sure to backstitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, so once they're sewn together along the top edge, we're going to start by first pressing that seam open. And then we're going to flip them so they are wrong sides together. And then I just make sure that the bottom corners are lined up. And then I press that seam allowance along the top folded edge. And now I'm going to take this over to the machine and I'm going to top stitch along the top edge. Okay, so now you'll place your one lining piece right side facing up, and it's the one without the cutout in the fusible fleece. And you'll place your slip pocket over top, also right side facing up, and make sure that the raw edges of the slip pocket are aligned with the raw edges at the bottom of the lining piece. And then you'll pin or clip that in place. And then we're just going to base stitch the slip pocket along all three sides. Now I forgot to mention that when you base stitch, you should use a seam allowance of about 1/4 inch. So now we're going to separate our slip pocket into 3 separate pockets. And you can separate them according to whatever size you want. I'm separating them by making marks 5.5 inches in from either side. And I make a mark at the top and the bottom. So it's 5.5 inches from this side, and then 5.5 inches from this side. And now for both set of marks, I'm going to start sewing from the bottom mark, and I'm going to sew up to the top mark at the opening of the pocket. And when you go to sew at the top edge, make sure that you backstitch a few times just to secure the opening of the pocket. You don't want these stitches to come undone. Okay, so now we have 3 separate slip pockets, like this. And we'll set that aside for now. Now you're going to need your zipper facing, the 2 zipper pocket lining pieces and your zipper, as well as the remaining main lining piece. So on the wrong side of the zipper facing piece, we're going to draw a rectangle box. And I want that rectangle box to be 9 inches wide by 3/8 of an inch high. And I'm going to place it 1 inch up from the bottom edge of the zipper facing piece. So now you'll need your main lining piece. And now again, if you look at the back, make sure that you have so there's the rectangle, the cutout in the fleece right here. And then there's a shorter space here and a longer space here. So that is the top edge, this is the bottom edge. Okay, so for this piece, because I want my zipper facing to be centered, I'm actually going to make marks on the front of the lining piece as well. And then you could do the same for the zipper facing piece. Usually I actually just eyeball this part, but I know some people really like it to be absolutely precise. And then I want to place the top edge of the zipper facing 3 inches below that top edge of my lining piece. So I'll just place my clear ruler. And then I'll also place this line at the center mark so that I know how to line this up perfectly. And then I'll pin my zipper facing in place. So if you feel through the lining piece, you should feel the lack of, oh, actually it should be this way, sorry. You should feel the lack of fusible fleece underneath the box. So I'm going to pin that in place now that I have it nicely centered. Okay, and I just double check to make sure I have the space. I can feel the space. Okay, so I'm going to remove the ruler here. I'm just going to add another pin at the top. So now I'm going to go over to the machine and I'm going to sew along the lines of the rectangle box, and I'm going to keep my needle in the down position so that it helps me rotate at the corners and make nice sharp corners. And I'm also going to use a slightly shorter stitch length. Okay, so I've sewn along the lines of the rectangle. I'm just going to take out my pins. And then if I flip it over, I should see my lines of stitching inside that opening in the fleece. So now I'm going to draw a line through the rectangle. So I'm going to draw a line through the center. And then from that center line, I'm going to draw 4 diagonal lines going from that center line to each of the 4 corners. And these are going to be my guidelines to cut out an opening inside the rectangle. So don't cut all the way from one end to the other. You're going to use a pair of very sharp scissors to cut out from along the diagonal lines from that center line to each of the 4 corners. And the key here is to get in as close as you can to the corner without cutting any of the stitches. Now, if you, in the next step, if you have puckering, it just means that you didn't cut close enough into the corners. So now what we're going to do is we're going to pull the facing in through that opening that we just cut inside the rectangle and pull it towards the wrong side, like this. And then we're going to press that seam allowance all along the rectangle box. And you're going to go slowly, and I find it helps if you roll that seam in between your fingertips and then press a small section at a time. And once you've pressed it from the right side, I flip it over and I also press from the wrong side. So I'm not sure if you can see, but I don't have any creases at my corners, which means that I cut into the corners close enough. Flip it over this way. So I'm just going to now set this aside for just a minute. And now you're going to take your zipper pocket lining pieces. So we're going to be turning this bag through the interior zipper pocket. So we're just going to do a few things to prepare it for that turning process. We're just going to press the bottom edges of the zipper pocket lining pieces towards the wrong side, about 3/8 of an inch. Don't worry if it's not exactly 3/8. What's important is that you press the bottom edge of both pieces approximately the same amount. Okay, so when that's done, we're just going to move this out of the way. You're going to take one piece and you're going to cut away 1 inch from the top edge of one piece only. I'm going to use my ruler. So you should now have one piece that is 1 inch shorter than the other. Take that shorter piece and then take your zipper, place your zipper over top with this edge of your zipper lined up with the top straight edge of the lining piece, and then clip it in place. And then you're going to sew the zipper to the lining piece along this top edge with 1/4 inch seam allowance, and make sure that you backstitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, so once that zipper is attached to the lining piece, we're going to press the lining piece away from the zipper. Like this. And then you're going to take the second zipper pocket lining piece, place it right side facing up, and now place that zipper also right side facing up, and this lining piece should be wrong side facing up, and pin or clip it in place. So these edges here should be aligned. And then I'm going to sew the zipper in place here onto this other lining piece. Again, 1/4 inch seam allowance and backstitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, so the second piece is now sewn to the zipper. I'm doing the same thing as I did for the first, and I'm going to press it away from the zipper. So looking from this view, you have the zipper wrong side facing up and the two lining pieces right side facing up. And if you turn it around, now your lining pieces are wrong side facing up and your zipper is right side facing up. So now we're going to take that lining piece with the rectangle opening in it. We're going to place this right side, the zipper's right side facing up, these are wrong side facing up, and you want the smaller, the shorter piece, the shorter lining piece to be at the bottom. And then you place this over top, pull through. Now on the sides here, I want the edges of the zipper facing to be lined up with the edges of the zipper pocket lining pieces. So I'm going to push this over a little. Okay, so you want these to be lined up, and then you want your zipper to be centered in the rectangle box like this. So there's a few things you can do here. Some people like to use double-sided tape. Sometimes some people like to pin, and some like to use glue. I like to be able to adjust the position as I'm sewing of my zipper within the rectangle box. So I actually just add a pin at both ends. I've sewn so many zipper pockets at this point that I had to take little shortcuts. Okay, so now I'm going to sew the zipper in place within the rectangle box by sewing all along the edge of the rectangle opening with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, and I make sure that I backstitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, so my zipper is sewn in place. Now I'm going to flip this over, and I'm going to take the top lining piece and I'm going to bring it down so that the folded edges meet with the bottom zipper pocket lining piece. And I clip these bottom folded edges together like this. And then you'll notice that it's kind of a bubble here. So what I'll do is I'm actually going to press this upwards, because what it does is it keeps that top lining piece out of the zipper when you're opening and closing it later. So now we're going to sew up the sides of the zipper pocket. So what I like to do is I like to sew it this way facing up, and then I flip my lining piece out of the way. You're also going to want to put your zipper pull to the middle. And I start sewing at the top. I back stitch. I sew as close as I can to this little triangle of fabric. And then as I go down towards the bottom, I sort of get closer to the bottom corner here, about 3/8 of an inch. And then I will do the same thing on this side. Start from the top, back stitch, sew all the way down. And then as I'm getting down to the bottom corner, I go about 3/8 of an inch to the edge here of the bottom corner. Okay, so I'm just going to trim the seam allowance a tiny little bit at these bottom corners. You don't have to trim anything else because it's nowhere near your side seams. And then you'll have this opening at the bottom of your zipper pocket. And before you forget, open up the zipper all the way. So you should have an opening like this. So now we're going to take both lining pieces and we're going to attach our top band pieces. So you'll place them right sides together and clip them along the top edge. And I'm going to do both of these at the same time. So you're going to sew them together. Make sure that you backstitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, so the top band is sewn to both lining pieces. Now I'm going to press the top bands away from the lining. And I'm going to do that for both. And now I'm going to top stitch that seam allowance along the bottom edge of both top band pieces. Okay, so the top stitching is done. Now I'm going to place these right sides together, and I'm going to make sure that the bottom edge of the top bands are aligned and clip them together, and then clip the rest of the edge. And then I'm going to do the same on this side. Line up the bottom edges of those top bands. And then the rest. So now I'm going to sew them together along both sides, making sure to backstitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, so the sides are sewn up and we have a giant tube. Now, if you like, you can go ahead and press those side seams open. Now, the last step in this video is going to be attaching the bottom lining piece to the bottom edges of your lining shell. And we're going to be doing the same as we did for the exterior. You're going to start by pinning or clipping those center marks. So this time the side seams are attached to the rounded ends of the bottom piece. And these center marks along the straight edge of the bottom are attached to the center bottom of the lining pieces. And then we're going to finish clipping or pinning the rest in between those center marks. Now, if you see a little bit of rippling or puckering in the seam like this is exactly what we want in the corners. Because when we attach it, we're going to ease that bottom in. So this is a perfect way to make sure that your bottom is nice and snug. Okay, so now we're going to sew the bottom to the bottom lining piece to the bottom edge of the lining pieces. And when we do this, I like to sew it with the body on the top. The bottom piece should be lying on the bed of your machine. When we get to the rounded corners where I mentioned we had some of the bottom piece was sort of rippling, that is what we want because it means that it'll allow us to ease in the corners. And what you're going to do is you're going to cut notches into the bottom of the lining piece so that it stretches and fits nicely around the curved edges of the bottom piece. And normally I like to sew the bottom here with a larger seam allowance to make sure that the lining is not baggy. However, it's a little bit harder when you're sewing a curved bottom, so we're going to first sew it at the regular 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then we'll go a second time and increase the seam allowance. Okay, so I'm getting around that bottom corner, and just want to make sure, so I'm just trimming the bottom of the lining piece here, not the bottom. Okay, so now I've sewn on the bottom once, and I'm going to go around again, and this time I'm going to use a larger seam allowance. Okay, so the bottom is attached, and we are now just going to trim the seam allowance. And then that will be the end of this video. In the last video, we're going to do the final assembly of our bag. We're going to attach the lining and the exterior shells together, and then we're going to install our grommets, and then we are going to just add the drawstring cincher, just so that to prevent your drawstring from coming out. And then our bag will be done. And that's it. The lining is ready to attach to the exterior.